performance testing hands-on. I'm going to share my screen right now, so you should be able to see the contents. Yeah, so basically today we will be doing some hands-on performance testing using JMeter, namely. We will also need to go a bit into detail about some terminology that we're going to use. You don't need to worry. It's nothing, let's say, scary in a way. It's something just that we use when we use especially JMeter. So those terms will, I hopefully feel that you will find a lot simpler and easy to use once we are done with some of the practical exercises. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So to kick off everything today, I want us to do a little, let's say a little discussion to help us a bit remember what we covered in the previous lecture. And as you can see here, we have a little scenario which says think about a major sports event like the World Cup final, and then streaming services experience a surge in viewers during the event. So some streaming platform, maybe BBC, maybe Sky Sports, whoever, has a surge of viewers. Maybe it's the final, right? And let's say you are responsible for ensuring that the service platform performs smoothly. So everything goes according to plan. You have maybe 6 million people watching, and you need to make sure that everything is okay. So with that in mind, what kind of problems do you think might arise if the service is not prepared to handle the increased viewership? So based on what we talked about in the previous lecture, what do you think could happen if we do not prepare everything as it needs to be for the streaming platform on time? So we talked a bit about this. You can write it in the chat if you want. What issues do you think can arise? Again, no wrong answers. You can put whatever you think could happen. I see Inas wrote site crashes. Yep, that is correct. The site could crash. That is one thing that can happen. Let's see, what did we also discuss aside from the application crashing? So maybe something related to, let's say, accessibility. What do you think? Do you think something regarding that? Or regarding the speed of the site? So what issues can we expect? I see some people are writing in the chat. Again, feel free to write down whatever you think. I see Bin wrote 503. Yeah, gateway timeout. There could be timeouts, of course. Wonderful. I really appreciate also that you used the status code, so very well done for that. That's actually, I highlighted that as well. It's a very, very, I would say, repetitive status code that you will see, especially when performance testing, so well done for that. Yeah, so basically, to keep it simple, the site could crash, right? There could be timeouts, so some users might not be able to access it. Some users might be able to access the page, but will have a harder time navigating. Maybe their stream will lag, so they will have to wait for the live to buffer, to load in certain aspects, at certain points. So somebody might have issues with that. I see Bino also wrote resource issues. Of course, resource issues. So something might not appear on the page. Maybe you won't be able to see the live chat, like let's say on a platform like Twitch. So you're not able to interact with whoever is streaming. Isinas also wrote slow loading, of course. So that is one big issue. So maybe I will be able to access the page at the right time, at the right place. But let's say Inas is having a hard time even opening the page, let alone the stream, or his stream just keeps on loading due to the sheer amount. So this is a very good handful of issues that we could come across when we're doing performance tests. And this is why we want to do our performance tests. Now, we know what are the issues. Now, what do you think you can do as a tester? So imagine you are a tester. What type of tests, or what would you do before this launch date, let's say, or this big stream day comes up, so that you can avoid or mitigate these issues? So what would you do? Would you do some types of tests, or would you maybe do something or work together with developers for some tasks? So what is your idea for this? You can write it again in the live chat. So what do you think is the best approach so we can avoid this? Should we run some tests? If yes, what type of tests should we run? I see more people are writing in the chat. Okay, ACBB wrote run once the page. Okay. Let's just see. So do you mean as in run some performance tests on the page, maybe? Like try to see. I see another message from Binu. He said endurance tests. Okay, yeah, endurance tests. That would definitely work. We will be running the stream for maybe 2 hours, so with commercials, let's say, and everything. So having the page up and running for 2 hours with a lot of users is definitely something we need to do. I see Nas wrote, do load tests and work with developers to enable scaling. That's a very good answer. Wonderful. Yeah, that's also correct. Load tests, absolutely. We are working with a huge amount of users. And if we want to go a step further, we communicate with developers, see how we can scale the application, and then run our tests on that as well. So basically load testing and scale testing in the same sequence, which is wonderful. Thank you for that. I see BB wrote, yes, I'm in test first. Yep, wonderful. That ties into the other answers. So job to everyone. Yeah, so essentially, if we want to avoid these non-functional issues, so not related to the components themselves, we would need to practice all of the basically load tests, or rather performance tests that we talked about in the previous lecture, to make sure that everything is working as expected. Now, it's all good that we, let's say, understood the theoretical aspects of them. However, the idea today is that we get to see some of these in action and just see some of the software that is used to run these performance tests, as well as discuss a bit about what are the capabilities of the said software. So that will be basically some of the learning objectives that we have for today, basically getting an idea of how we can write test scripts for performance testing, understand how important it is to design a scenario and to model a workload, essentially. This is a very important aspect of when we do performance tests, because it's not really the same as functional tests. So this will be something that we need and have to tackle. We will get a bit of hands-on experience with JMeter, as I mentioned before, and we will, of course, create and execute the scripts in JMeter. Hopefully, we have time to do at least 2 to 3 exercises. We will see as we go along in the lecture, and see some advanced features of JMeter so that we can also improve our already existing performance tests. So without further ado, I will jump right into the contents for the performance test scripting basics. So when we talk about scripting for performance tests, um, we don't necessarily only mean writing code inside a whatever language you want to use, like Java, JavaScript, or whatever. We sometimes only refer to like a set of actions, so a set of actions that a user would perform from a non-functional aspect. So don't be confused when you use the terminology, for example, performance test scripting, because you will see later in JMeter, we won't actually be using code. So we're not going to be coding anything like we did with Selenium, but we're actually going to be using separate components and constructing a flow. And the flow that we are constructing actually is what is known as the performance test script. Now, although you might see there are some, let's say it's technically a bit of manual work when you're creating this flow, it is actually a very valuable, I would say, addition to the overall software development lifecycle, because when you have these scripts, they really help in automating the process of essentially performance testing. And why is that? Well, imagine that you have to simulate say 100 users for a specific app. In theory, you can actually do a silent launch, notify the 100 users that you wish to take part, and then you give them instructions. For example, Angelo, you can do that on the page. Peter, you can do that. So you're just sending out an email and everybody needs to do that. But this is, again, very unstructured. This is heavily reliant on other people or how they will behave on those sessions, how good their internet connection is. So having this capability to create these flows in these software like JMeter, like LoadRunner, so on and so forth, gives us this automated flow where we just input how many users and how much time we need for our tests, and then everything runs smoothly. Tying that in, it's also part of the benefits. So instead of having to run some specific scenarios with actual users, we have the flow, which has some kind of steps or a scenario that it executes. And basically, we have it automated to perform it with however many users we need for that scenario. So automation is one of the key benefits. Then we have scalability. So scripts, and we will see later in JMeter as well, softwares that provide us the ability to create these scripts actually have the performance of adding about tens of thousands of even millions of users, so simulating this large of a user load. And that means that we can basically test if we need with, let's say, 100,000 users, we can test with 300 users, we can test with 10,000, so you can actually scale up and down depending on how or what are the needs for the application test that you're running. Accuracy. So the really good thing about these scripting applications is that they really do all the steps that a user does accurately, and they provide reliable data on the performance of the application. So they give us basically performance metrics that we talked about in the previous lecture within a report that they can generate, and we essentially see how much time maybe the simulated user spent on a page, what were the issues on some page. Maybe some page had a 503 error, maybe some page had an internal server. So you will see as we go about this later. And then we have customization. Basically, you can actually specify all your scripts for specific scenarios. So let me give you an idea. If you have, for example, you need to test the Amazon homepage, and let's say you wanted to test the search page, you can actually create a flow for the homepage separately. You can then tailor a specific script for the search page. You can combine them into one single scenario. It all depends on how you prefer to work. I highly recommend when you customize these scripts to have them separate so that you know what you need to run. But again, this differs from person to person. Okay, do we have any questions so far? I see none in the chat for now. Okay, if there are no questions, I will move on to the basic components of a performance test script. Okay, so now you might hear some terms that we probably have not used until this point. Some that you might have heard in maybe the API or TestNG lectures. So there could be some items here and there. What I want you to know is everything that we will read now, and all the terminology here, is something that we as testers have to know and communicate with developers. So everything that we will see in this terminology here is needed for us as testers, for developers, and then for the clients, you will obviously be using terms that are easier to understand for them, and we will see just why it's important to remember them such. So the first thing that you will most likely notice, aside from a test plan, is the thread groups. So what are thread groups? In virtually all frameworks that are used for performance testing, thread group is like a general term that represents a group of virtual users. You can call them simulated users if it's easier for you to remember. So the thread group is essentially like a collection of users, and inside it, you define for that thread group, how many threads do you want? So a thread is a user. So you define how many threads do you want to use? How much time do you want those threads to be running on the page? So how much do you want those users to be hitting the page? You can maybe say have around 10,000 users that will use the page for about 1 hour. So you set up the timing for that. You can also set up a ramp up period. So you can actually say after a certain amount of time, all of the users or threads should be on the page. So a thread group is basically the place where we define how many users we want to use, how much time do you want to run the test for, and at what point do we have the maximum number of users. Now, speaking here without using any software might be a bit difficult to understand, but when we open JMeter, you will see it makes a lot of sense and it's quite intuitive. So the thread group is our user group. You can call it user group, and we will see how it is configured later on. Now, the second point is samplers. Now, the samplers are basically actions. So samplers are the actions that the user takes. Meaning, if you click on a button, if you remember from the API lecture, we sent some kind of post or maybe some put method, right? So essentially, the samplers are those simulations. So if you upload a file, you will need to use a sampler and you will need to use a post method. If you're trying to reach a page, so if you just try to visit, let's say, Amazon.com, then you're using a get method, so you're going to use a sampler with that method. And we will see, we will be using samplers a lot, and you will be using them as well later on projects. These are basically the actions. So we will see in JMeter how they're also defined, and they just simulate what we are doing at our flow, whether that is logging into a page, whether that is just getting content from a page, uploading something. So this is what samplers are used for. Again, these in the thread group are probably 2 of the 3 or 4 most common used items for performance testing. Then we have the listeners. Now, as the name suggests, they listen to what is happening. So listeners are basically the items that collect everything that is happening. So all of the data, all of the action that's going on with the samplers, and translates it to and provides us actually the results of it. So it's essentially, let's say, a real-time report in a way. So you run the test, so you perform an action, you use a sampler, and then if everything is okay, the listener will show you a maybe status code 200 with information that you need to have returned to know that, okay, the test is working as expected. So for the listener, basically it is a depiction of the results based on your tests. We will see again is these listeners, so there are multiple type of listeners. It doesn't matter which one you use, it's just a personal preference, but these are essentially used to monitor our test data, and more often than not, you will be using listeners to only debug your tests. I will mention later on why this is important to know, but they are very useful and quite commonly used when you design your script. So when you design your script, this is your go-to to know if your script is okay or if you need to change something. Now over to the more, let's say, advanced items, we have the controllers. And basically controllers are, in a way, modifiers of the flow. So let me give you an example because it's a bit difficult. Let's say you have a page where you want to only have one session. So you want to log in with only one user and then simulate that user 10,000 times. So if you want to use only that user session, you don't want to create another user and have another session. You just want this session 10,000 times. You will need something that will allow you to execute your login steps only once. So You don't want them to happen 10,000 times. You just want them to be executed once. And in order to modify the flow where only one user gets to do those steps, so only one person logs in, and then that user is used, you need a controller, and that controller will modify your flow. So there is this thing called once only controller. You put that in, you add samplers for the controller, and those follow its instruction. Or in other words, they execute only once. So these are basically items that control the flow logic. So anytime you want to do something that is outside of the flow that you're constructing, so let's say you want to check whether the login, whether 50,000 users can log in, then you would probably need to use some kind of logic to maybe loop and add 5,000 items with a single sampler. So maybe you will need to use a for controller. There's also a for controller that executes a loop, so on and so forth. So basically, these are used to do modifications to your flow based on your needs. Then we have timers, and as the name suggests, is essentially a timer that performs, that is basically used for specific actions or just to delay the action that one thread takes in comparison to the other. So if you really want to simulate real user flow, you need timers. So let's say 5 people are logged in on a page. Not all of them will perform all of the actions at the same time. So maybe I need extra 3 seconds. Maybe the other user needs 10 seconds. Maybe somebody has NASA level internet, so they just need 1 second. So these timers are just to simulate the actions happening in real time. We move on to the assertions. I think you're mostly familiar with this from the automation testing, but these are just to check whether the response from the server is valid. This is essentially used if you want to add another layer of, let's say, test evidence. So if you want to make sure that what you get is what you expect. But I would really say in performance testing, it's a bit rarely used because you have the result, you have the listener, which you will get the results from. And usually we have specific commands that generate a report, and we immediately see what tests are passing, what tests are failing. But if you do have specific things that you want to check and you don't want to do it by eye, so you don't want to manually verify everything, you can absolutely use the assertions. Same as with TestNG, with Selenium and REST-Sharp. Then we go to the configuration elements. There are also elements that you can actually configure, like variables, headers, so on and so forth. So you can actually add parameters if you want to hide, let's say, sensitive data. So that maybe you don't want to have it displayed when the tests are being run, or you just want to simplify your flow and you just want to, let's say, add a single URL that you use for maybe 10 samplers in one place. So you can configure it in that single place in the configuration, and then that will be applied for all your requests. So you can use that URL 10 times. We will see this as well. It's a very good practice to use configuration elements, and we really do use it quite often when we're testing, because again, oftentimes when you're testing of the flow of a specific release, you will have at least a base URL that repeats. So maybe you will have Amazon.com in every test. So you don't want to copy paste Amazon.com every time that you create a new request. So you'll probably have it configured in this configuration, and it will be pulled automatically. So you don't have to write it each time that you create a request. Finally, we have preprocessor and post-processor. Again, if you remember from TestNG, we had before all, and then we have after all. It is the same correlation. So you want to do something before you send the request or after it has been sent. So maybe you want to get a token before you execute the request. Maybe you don't want to simulate the token extraction from JMeter, which is quite common. So a lot of people want to get a token for a login before the test start. If it's needed if you need to destroy it, if you need to destroy something after you are done testing, you might use a post processor. Again, this all depends on a project. more often than not, you might need to use the preprocessors for tokens, so to generate tokens before you start your test. But again, it depends from project to project. From my personal experience, I've never used the preprocessor and post-processors for JMeter thus far, because most of my tests also relied on that token being generated. And if I didn't test it, then it goes out of scope, which is not what we want. So again, it depends from project to project, but from what I've seen, you might not really need them that often, but it's good to know that you have the opportunity to use them. Okay. Do we have any other questions so far? Feel free to let me know. I know these are a lot of terms. We will see them in JMeter as well. We will talk about them in these sessions quite a lot, so we will be seeing more of them. But yeah, if you do not have any questions about the components of a test script, I think that we can move to the next bit, which is scenario design and workload modeling. Okay, now this is very important. When you do performance tests, it's really important to have a vision of what you want to do. And aside from knowing what we want to do, we also need to know what we are working with. So what is the load, or what is the amount of users that we need to use for our scenario? And these are two very important things that we always have to keep in mind when we do these scripts. Why is that? Well, imagine you get the opportunity um, to basically, let's say, do performance tests. You only have 5 days maybe to prepare everything, and you just take every page that you've worked on, you place it in JMeter, and you run the tests. So yes, you can theoretically do that, but then you might run into issues where the flow doesn't make sense. Maybe you've added some samplers where you should not have added them. Maybe you need to reorder something, and then it all becomes a big mess. You might have failing tests due to issues with the scripts that you have created, and this can all get complicated very, very easy. Now, to avoid that, one thing that you want to do, even when you have the least amount of time available, is outline a scenario or design a scenario. So what you want to do when you basically get the opportunity to run these performance tests that you prepare is you want to identify key actions. So this is very important. So see what is important for your scenario. If it's a login, you'll probably want to focus more on the login, on the home page maybe, because that's where the people access the login from, and then the user profile page maybe, because that is where they will land after they log in. So you will have some kind of scenario, like I go from the home page, I select login, I'm on the login page, I provide credentials, and then I'm on the My Profile page. So now you have a scenario. Now you have an idea of where you want to go, and then you have an idea of what actions you need to take. So you need to get to the home page. You need to click some kind of CTA, maybe a post put action. Then you need to post or put again, depending on what you need to do for the latter part, your credentials. And then you need to get the page, which is the My Profile page, after this is done. That ties into the map user journeys. So again, we're starting from the home page and we're ending in the My Profile page. You could have maybe other pages in between, and that's why it's important to map every journey that you think can happen. Again, this varies from journey to journey. Maybe you're going to be testing a payment form, so you don't need to even log in for that. So you can just directly go from the home page to the payment form to whatever next page comes. But it's important to know how you will outline the journey. Finally, prioritizing scenarios. So if you know that the main scenario is the login or the payment of the form, you want to make sure that those are the ones that you prioritize in hitting with your performance tests. That doesn't mean that you neglect the other scenarios. However, these are the primary focus. And let me give you a good example. So previously we had payment form on a donation form rather on one of our pages, and you could either pay on the form with a logged in user, and you can also pay with a logged out user. Now, when you're logged in, obviously you have some kind of cookie stored, everything like that. And there was a bit of different content on the page in comparison to when you're not logged in. So we needed to cover both a logged in user, and we also needed to cover a non-logged in user. Now, our priority was not whether the user is logged in. Our priority was if there are too many people donating on the page, what will happen? So even though we had a scenario for when you're logged in as a user, we still wanted to prioritize the not logged in one by just hitting the page because there was not much difference in the content. So we were really focusing on trying to hit the page as much as we can with all the amount of users that we had provided, run spike tests, so everything that we needed to run basically in our case. And then at the very end, we essentially just logged in, ran some of the same scenarios when we were logged in. Again, we're not really focusing that much on creating the best login flow that we can because we were only interested in hitting that page. So prioritizing based on what you have in requirements is very important when you have the scenario and the map laid out. Now, the other bit that we need to talk about here is workloads. So now you have your scenario, right? You know what you want to do. You have your priorities set up. You have a little journey that you have mapped up, which is great. But now comes the part where you need to see what is the workload. Now, you might come into situations where people might even tell you, okay, just try to use as much users as you can. It is realistic. On one of my projects, I had this told to me from the QA side, from the client, to just use as much users as you can. Why is this an invalid approach? You might think, but okay, if it can handle, let's say, 200,000 users, then it should handle 50,000 users. That is correct. But sometimes if we just go with the large number, we might end up in a bigger mess than we should ever expect to end up just because we wanted to go above and beyond and do unrealistic stress testing. That's why it's very important to have an idea of how much we want to use in our workload. If you remember in the previous lecture, we talked a bit about using Google Analytics or Log Analytics Workspace in Azure. So you can see a lot of tools like this, and most, or rather all projects use them. So what you want to do is take that tool and do a bit of research so you can model a workload. So what do those pages tell you? They tell you user behavior. So when you open them up, you can actually see how users interact with some pages. This again applies if you're using mobile applications, so everything in accordance to the system that you're working on. And you can actually see how the users behave. Maybe they just stay for 10 seconds on the home page at all times, and when they use the login, they stay for 15. Maybe they interact with a certain page for a longer period of time, but they only use 2 to 3 seconds to redirect from one page to another. So you actually see how the user behaves on different pages. The next thing to note, and the most important part, is to see how many people are visiting the page. Now, again, you will have these numbers, and all you need to do is just to see what is some kind of average that you can find. So what is the average amount of users hitting a page? What is the peak number of users? Why was the peak there? So what happened during that time? Again, you do have dates, you have numbers, you have all of this information in such applications, which really helps us a lot. And finally, you want to simulate the load. So once you've gathered information on how much time maybe the users are spending on some parts of the application, as well as what were maybe the peak number of users with the least number of users with the average, so on and so forth, you can actually determine what is the load that you can use. We also have a, I would say mathematical formula that we use, but I will get into that when we use JMeter because it's more specific to JMeter. And essentially, you have the load modeled once you get this information. Another factor that we always have to keep in mind for this is also client perspective. Sometimes clients can say, well, yeah, you did read and see that there were 50,000 users in that day, but we think that there will be 300,000 users in an hour. And it's important when you have such a scenario to rethink and redesign and see whether that is accurate or makes sense. And we discuss it with clients, do a bit more research. So it is our job as QAs to give a recommendation, which is again realistic, which ties into the application, unless they have maybe deduced this from their own analytics research, which we might also miss sometimes. So it's good to have a separate meeting and just clarify or confirm what we will be using. Now, here are some example load patterns that you expect on most projects. You have constant load. So this is something that you usually use when you have releases and you just want to make sure that nothing is broken, everything is functioning performance-wise correctly. So everything is going smoothly. You have an average amount of users that you know that use the page. So these tests usually with this load are run quite frequently. You have ramp up, ramp down. So these are tests when you want to see, when you want to do some scaling scenarios. So maybe for some time you want to see if the environment can handle 10,000 users, then scale down to 200 users if everything is running smoothly in both scenarios. So you can use that again with the information that you gather. And then we have peak load, which basically, as we mentioned previously, we just see what is the maximum amount of users we got. You can use spike testing, load testing for this, endurance testing, stress testing. So different types of performance testing to check the peak load. And again, it all depends on what you want to achieve with your performance test. However, having the scenario, combining it with the research that you do for the workload is important. We don't want to be under the amount of users that we expect when we run our performance tests. We don't want to be way above the amount of users that we can expect. So if we do a spike, we don't want to do it for a million users if our application can handle only 400,000. And of course, we want to be around the hotspot where we obviously will need to do a bit more users than we can actually expect, but just in the right amount, which is usually, let's say if you're using 10,000 users as measurement, you want to try with 15,000 and then you will basically validate if everything will be accepted at that range. Okay, do we have any questions for scenario design and workload modeling? Anything regarding the workload modeling or scenario? Again, feel free to ask anything, also interrupt me. So it's really important that we get these parts because we will see in the exercise. It's a bit simple maybe, but without having some idea of what we need, again, it's a bit of a challenge to get across it. Okay. Okay, I will go into the test data section then. Now, we talked throughout this entire program basically about the importance of test data. So similar to functional testing, in non-functional testing, test data plays a crucial part. Namely, for you to test data is basically what you will usually have um, uh, basically from your Google Analytics, let's say, or your analytics research, or in other words, the pages, maybe some credentials, maybe you will also have some files that you need to use, but more or less you will have at all times some kind of data that you need to prepare before you write your scripts and execute your tests. So it's very important when you have your plans, so you have your scenarios and workload planned out, everything is smooth. You want to identify what are the data requirements. So again, maybe you're going to be simulating a vast amount of file upload. So maybe you will need to simulate everybody uploading a profile picture to their account. So you'll probably need to have some kind of JPEG, PNG file. So you want to test with different sorts. So you will need to identify what you need. Maybe you just need credentials so you can try 500 different sessions at the same time. So identifying what data you need is key. Then create realistic data sets. Again, you want to represent data as similar as to that of real users as frequently as possible. So you don't just want to use images that are maybe 1 GB large if you're doing a file upload. Again, you want it to be realistic. You want to imagine what you would use for yourself and use that in the overall data. And then manage the variability of the data. You want to make sure that you have wide coverage. And by wide coverage, we also mean having something of everything. So if I'm using, if I want to do different sessions for logged in users, I would definitely want to see maybe users that are of type, let's say members, non-members, students, elderly. So maybe there are different types of accounts. So you want to cover and have something of each. And this ties very well to the best practices for data. You also want to make sure that when you use this data, it's anonymous. So any sensitive data, you want to store it, whether that be in some Excel files that are not visible to the public, and then use variables in your test. So again, data anonymization is very important in all aspects. You want it to be consistent. So you want to you don't want to vary too much in the type of data you use or the amount of data you use. You just want to have a specific amount that you will either modify or have it changed in time. And then, of course, dynamic data. We don't want to use the same data over and over again. So if you already ran your performance tests with a set of credentials or a set of files, it is ideal if you provide new ones for the next run. So each run should have separate data, which is most often quite easy to generate, depending on what system you're using, what type of databases, or maybe you're just having some kind of JSON data that you want to use. But again, you want to make sure that the data is dynamic, it changes over time, and essentially it is not the same one that we reuse for each scenario, because at the end of the day, our tests may become redundant, and that's not something that we want when we're validating non-functional requirements. Okay. Do we have any questions for the test data for performance testing? Okay. I don't see any questions so far. All right. Then I would like us to do the knowledge check number 1 then. So there's to be, because again, we have a lot of terminology today. It's good to have a bit of a reminder of what we went through for these sections. So at the end of it, we'll see if somebody else has something to ask. So let's do the bit here for the knowledge check. You can, again, I will open the drop downs. You can also tell me 1 to 4, A to D, however you prefer in the live chat, what answer you want to use. Let's go. So question 1, performance test scripting helps in blank the process of load generation and performance measurement. So which one of these options do you think is the correct one? I see Theodora wrote automating. All right. Let's see somebody else if you have a different maybe answer, or do you agree with this answer? Again, you can write the name of the option. You can write 1 to 4, A to D. Anything is acceptable. Sinas also wrote automating. All right. I'll wait for a bit more. Somebody else has something to add. All right. If not, I'm gonna choose the option. I see that Mino and Valentina agree with Theodora. So all right. Then I'm just gonna go with automating as the option, which is correct. So basically that supports automation, as we mentioned before. and essentially we mentioned that some of the other aspects are related. Some of the other aspects are not related really, because ignoring and complicating are definitely not something that the scripts do for our overall testing process. So good job to everyone. Let's move to question 2. So A, we have blank. Group represents a group of virtual users that simulate real user actions in a performance test script. So what kind of group? ICB wrote thread, Inas wrote thread as well. Okay. Let's see. Maybe somebody thinks otherwise. So feel free to put your answers down in the live chat. All right. I'll take the thread group as the answer. And you are correct. So as we mentioned, thread group is a group of virtual users. You can call them simulated users. So it all depends on your preference, but the thread group represents just that. Wonderful. Let's move to number 3. So blank are specific sequences of actions within a user scenario that are measured separately to analyze performance. So which one of these are sequences of actions within a user scenario that are measured separately to analyze performance? I see Theodora wrote transactions. Okay. I see BB also wrote transactions. Okay. I see again a unison agreement for transactions. All right. I'm going to select the transactions as the answer, and it is correct. So these are specific sequences of actions within the user scenario. Regarding the other ones, listeners were, as we said, built-in reports. Controllers modify the logic of the flow, and then the timers are just timers for making the scenario a bit more realistic. So again, good job to everyone. We have 2 more questions. Number 4, modeling realistic workloads involves simulating the expected blank on the application to understand how it performs under various conditions. So I can open this. Now let's see what you all think. I see Valentina wrote load, Ines and Bibi both agree, wrote load. Okay. I'll wait a bit before we continue. All right, I don't see anyone else writing anything different. So we're gonna select the load, which is again correct. This was a bit tricky because it was a bit also from the previous lecture. So I'm happy to see that you're all already getting the hang of this. And the last question, creating realistic test data is crucial for simulating accurate blank interactions and ensuring the accuracy of performance tests. So we have user, database, server, and network as options. I see Valentina wrote user. Okay. Bino also wrote user. Wonderful. Right. I see again user from both BB and Inas as well. Okay. I can see already there is another unison, so I'm going to select the user option as well, and that will be the correct one. So the realistic test data is dependent on user interactions, so not server or something else. We want to simulate actual users doing some actions on the page. So again, wonderful job to everyone. Happy to see that you are all getting the hang of this so smoothly. So we will move on before the break with this last section, which is getting started with JMeter, so we can just get a bit of an idea for the tool, and then we will jump a bit more into the interface and logistics of it. So if you remember in the previous lecture, we talked a bit about JMeter. It's an open source tool. It is designed for load testing, mainly and mostly it is used for load testing. You can check some things related to APIs if you wish as well, but I would not really recommend it. And it supports a big amount of, let's say, different protocols, which we will also see a bit later on. So essentially, it is one of the most widely used performance testing tools due to its support and to its easy use and integration into pipelines. Now, some of the functionalities that and capabilities that JMeter comes with are the following that we have here. So some capabilities are having threading, so you can actually, we will see the thread groups and users that we will simulate. It has a big community support, is highly customized, integrated scripts, has reporting, it's platform independent, easy to manage, UI friendly. So all of these are basically items that come along with JMeter and make it such a powerful and easy to use tool as well. These are some of the main key features that you can see here. Platform independence, as I mentioned, so you can actually use it on any operating system. So you can use it on Mac, Mac OS, you can use it Windows, Linux, supports everything. It has a wide protocol support. Again, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, more or less. Nowadays, I think it supports basically everything. It has a very easy to use graphical user interface. It's quite simple, intuitive. You might think it has a lot of options at the beginning. It's pretty normal. Everybody does when they see it, but when you use it for the second or third time, it becomes very intuitive. It's extensible, so you can actually add plugins. So similar to when you add plugins in your browser, you can actually add them to JMeter. It has a vast amount of plugins. You can see some instructions in its documentation, but it has a lot of plugins, and I think you will probably run into some plugins on larger projects because it doesn't come built in with everything you need sometimes. Has scripting support, so you can actually script complex scenarios with Bean Shell, Groovy, JavaScript, but I would leave this out for now. This is something that I would recommend only touching on when you have a very, very advanced level of performance testing. It supports distributed testing, so you can actually use multiple machines to generate load at the same time. And again, reporting provides very neat reports in HTML, which is very nice and very human readable. So that's basically about those bits. And then capabilities, as we mentioned, you can load test, stress test, endurance test, spike test, functional testing as well. As I mentioned, you can do some API tests if you wish to, but I don't really recommend it. You can use Postman for that if you want to keep it manual, but you do have that option. For spike, load, stress, and endurance, you can absolutely use JMeter. I've used it for all of these separately. So we've done endurance tests. We've run them for, I think it was the longest, about 10 hours. We've done spike tests a lot of times. So most times we did spike and load testing. You can also do stress testing. So it is capable of handling it without crashing. So it has all of these capabilities built into it, similar to other more known frameworks. I see a question from Valentina. Where can we download it? You can actually, I will send you a link right now. I usually just write JMeter download and you will be taken to this page. I will send this in the chat right away so you can download it. It's quite straightforward. So you can just go on this page where I'm right now, and you can just select from here where you have all these options to download. I usually just download this that you see, TGZ. So you can just click on this and it should start to download. And then you don't even need to install it. Again, I just use the zip. I think I clicked the TGZ though, sorry for that. But you can just download the zip. And once you have it downloaded, you can just extract it. And then when you extract it, you don't need to do anything else. So you just extract JMeter and it works from the get-go. What I would recommend is when you download it, let me just see here. What I usually do for JMeter, and I also do it on projects, you don't have to follow this. It's all up to you how you prefer. I usually go to my local disk. So mine is C, and then I create JMeter here because I want really to be as simple as possible when I want to locate it. So I just create a folder here, you create folder. So just that. I name it JMeter. And inside you can see this is the zip that you download. So this is what you will see when you download JMeter. I extract everything from it. So I extract all here. I'm not going to do it because it's already extracted. And once you extract everything, you will see this Apache JMeter. And when you open it, you will find everything you need here. And you don't need to install anything. So you just extract what you download, and then when you want to run it, I will show you how I can run it by just opening one batch file. But I think we can do that in the next session, because I will also show you some things inside JMeter, so we can save something for that bit. But that is the process. So you just download the zip from the link and the page I just sent. So this one, 563 zip. Extract the file. Again, you can extract it wherever you want. You don't have to do it like I do it. I just said I prefer to have it in my C file here directly, JMeter, and extract it here, and then you're ready to use it. And I will show you how you can run it locally after we are done when we start actually in the next session. Okay. Do we have any questions regarding basically the basics of JMeter? I see Valentina wrote how to now. I don't see any program. Yeah, you won't be able to see it when you open the file. So this one where I have JMeter, you will see this bin, docs, extras, lib, and everything. You won't see an executable here, but I will show you in the next session how we can run it. So I will do it in the next one. It's quite straightforward, but let's save it for then, so we have like the structure followed from the lesson. Again, this is not mandatory for today. We will also have it. We will also have this in the virtual machine that we have in the content, but let me just send the link once again. I see Daniel, you want to have it, so I'll just paste it once again if anybody else wants to see it. But yeah, Valentina, you don't have any executable, so it's perfectly normal. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions for the time being, I think that will be it for this session. And yeah, Juman, I think we can have the break now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Alrighty, let's move on from where we last finished. I'm just going to share my screen here, and I think you should be able to see it. Okay, now we are at the JMeter interface right here, and I'm going to show you what are the key components. So first, we're going to start off to understand what is the JMeter interface and what we can see in it. And that is important because, again, we will be using it in this session and later in the next one as well. And it's good to have some awareness of what's going on. So when you open the JMeter interface, you should see something like this for the first time. So you're only going to see this test plan that we can actually see on the image. I can open it so we can zoom a bit and see it right here. And you should not have anything else. I will also start my own JMeter to show you how you can do that. And we'll see how it looks like there. And basically, the JMeter interface contains the following items, some that we also discussed in the previous section. So we have a test plan. So this is not something that we talked about, but this is something that comes built in. And this is basically the component that basically takes everything that you built within your test script. So this test plan contains all of your samplers, all of your upload items, all of your data configuration, your header configuration. So everything that you imagine that is part of a test script is part of this test plan. Then you have the thread groups, which, as you remember, we talked that these are virtual users. So this is the number of users that will perform every action that we will have in our test plan. Then we have the samplers, or rather the requests, the actions simulated for the user. So this is what the users will be doing and the pages that they will be visiting within our test plan. Then we have the listeners, something that gives us the results that we will have from our tests. So we will see there are different types of these listeners that we can actually use. Then we have the controllers, what we mentioned before. These basically control the flow of the execution, or rather modify everything that's happening within the flow. So maybe we need to loop something, maybe we have some condition that needs to happen before we can take some action. They just modify whatever happens with our flow. Then we have some timers. Again, make the flow more realistic, add some, let's say, difference in actions that are taken from the users. We have assertions, which we can use to validate if we get the correct response, or maybe some correct data or headers from the server. Then we have the configuration elements. Again, variables or maybe files that we want to upload, we can store here. And preprocessor and post-processor items, which again, similar to TestNG, are done before everything is executed or after the execution has concluded. Again, so the interface and the components of JMeter are virtually the same. One thing that you might notice for JMeter as well is that we did not have any executable file. Now, when you want to run JMeter, you can, the simplest way and the one that I really recommend to do, especially again for people who are just starting out, is the following. So what you can do is you can open, so now I'm going to start from the start. So first go to the folder where you added the zip file for your JMeter. For me, it's in disk JMeter. And after you have right-click extracted everything from the JMeter zip file, you will be able to see this Apache JMeter 563. I need to move this, but never mind. And once you open that folder, you will see this list of files and some text, MD files, so on and so forth, README. You can go through them if you wish to. However, the only thing that we will need right now is this bin folder. If you go into the binary file folder, you will see again a vast amount of items here. So you can see, you can scroll down, you have a lot of items that you can see here. All you need to do, so you can start JMeter, is just scroll down and you need to locate the JMeter batch file. So everything is alphabetically ordered. So we will find JMeter list like this. And then you see you have JMeter file, you have JMeter batch file, text document, properties, so on and so forth. You can use a shell script to run this JMeter item and you will be able to open it using that. But for the time being, all we need to do is use this Windows batch file. So this Windows batch file is your JMeter application. So it will just say JMeter Windows batch file here. All you need to do is just double click it. And you might or might not get this prompt like I have here. You can just click run. And what happens is you will see the command line pop up here. It will show some kind of text for all of you. We're just going to wait a few seconds. So you see warnings. So this is nothing to be afraid of. And now you can just minimize. Be careful not to close the command line. So just keep it minimized. And you will be able to see JMeter once all of that is ready. So this is the interface that you will be able to see. Again, at the moment, if you have some issues opening it, don't worry. For the exercises, we can use the virtual machine. It has everything set up for us, so we will still be able to use it there. And if you have it up and running, you can also use it here. So it is essentially the same program. But yeah, so this is how you can start JMeter. Again, you don't need to have it downloaded right now. This is because there were questions on how you can open it and how, because there is no executable file. So if you want to download it locally, run it locally, you can just click on the batch file in the directory bin, and you should be able to see this. Okay. Do we have any questions so far regarding the JMeter interface? I see Daniel wrote, I couldn't download. Yeah, we can, we don't actually really need it for now. Again, we have it in the virtual machine, so we can use it from there. But yeah, if you want, again, you just need to go to the JMeter official page that we linked and just click the zip it should work. Otherwise, it could be some maybe network issue, but that should all work. Okay. I don't see any questions regarding the interface, so I'm just going to move to the key components of JMeter scripts. So now for this part, I'm going to open my JMeter alongside so you can see the content and also see the items that we will talk about. So I think we can do it like this. So the first item that we will see is the test plan. So as we mentioned in the previous part, the test plan is what holds our entire flow, our entire scripts together. So everything that you need to have in order to have a fully functional script is under the test plan. Now, this test plan is specific to JMeter. You might have different items like this in different frameworks. So if you work with Gatling, you might have test suite. If you're working with K6, you might have test projects. So it differs. So this is not something that is set in stone or something you have to remember by heart. This is again something specific to JMeter, and it is the top level of your scripts. And what you can see, what you have in this, essentially this test plan, I'm just going to open it a bit now. What we have inside is a name. Usually when you'll be working on projects, what you want to do in the name section here is write down like a descriptive name so you know what you will be testing. If I'm testing a login, let's say for something, I would say Swagger login performance tests. So I usually want to make sure that it is descriptive, that is something that is intuitive. So even people who don't have much technical knowledge of this will understand what this is. And one thing I highly recommend when you will be naming your test plan, so maybe not right now when you're still practicing, but for future reference, it is best to not have empty spaces. I learned that the hard way. Why? Because when you're working on projects, you will need to run these tests using a shell, or you will use a pipeline. And the thing is, when you have empty spaces, so if I use empty spaces instead of these underscores, so I'm just gonna do it like this. When you save the file at the end like this, it is going to cause issues when you try to navigate to the directory and run it. So it is going to register it as 3 commands, like Swagger login performance, instead of just as a single file. So I highly recommend when you go into projects and even when you're practicing, when you want to save, so when you want to save test plan as something, try to name it with the words sticking together. So that's like a heads up. Then what else you can see? You can have some user-defined variables within the test plan. I usually don't keep anything here. I prefer to have a configuration file. You can use them if you wish to do so. You can have options to run thread groups consecutively, so one at a time. You can run teardown thread groups after shutdown. So maybe if you have something that exits from the test, you can select this or not. Functional test mode. So this is if you want to basically do some API tests. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this today because we want to do more performance tests. And then that's basically all you will need. One thing to note is if you do have more thread groups, so if you have 2 to 3 thread groups and you want to run them separately, so you don't want them to run all at the same time, which I don't recommend, you can just tick this box, run thread groups consecutively. And this means one thread group will execute and then another and then the third one, which is ideal. If you have 2 to 3 thread groups, you want to execute one, then the other. You don't want to execute everything because we will see in the tree, the results that you get are terrifying a bit when you have them coming in from everywhere. So just having this on is a very good practice when you have more thread groups. Now that is all regarding the test plan. I see in the chat, not able to find Java executable or version CMD. Anything I can do to fix that? Yeah, so Jixing, I see there were some replies in the thread. You would need to download Java. So when you download Java, it should be okay. So that's because you might not have it installed. So thank you everyone for also chiming in on that and providing info. ICB wrote, could you please explain the interface again? Just install now. I had to install Java. Yeah, of course. Basically, for the interface, I'm going to go through the components right now. Basically, we were talking a bit about the test plan. So as I mentioned, the test plan is what holds your tests together. So everything that you have, your configuration, your scripts, your samplers, your listeners, everything that you can imagine is inside the test plan. So this item here, because when you turn on JMeter, this is here by default. You can't run anything without the test plan. Now this is again related only to JMeter. A test plan might not appear if you use a different tool, because in Gatling you don't have a test plan, for example. You have a test suite. So again, this is JMeter specific, so you don't need to worry too much if you use another tool. And the test plan has a name, comments you can use. I usually never use them. And for the name, I also mentioned, when you want to name a test plan, I really recommend you use the different names together. So instead of naming it Angelo test, you name it Angelo_test. This is because when you will be running these tests on a project, you will most likely be using a shell script, so a PowerShell. And if you write them as this, JMeter is a bit, I would say, not the most optimal tool for that. If you try to run the test like this with the JMeter command, it will read them as two separate things. So it will not read them as a single JMeter file. So if you have them saved like this, you might have errors when you're running them in a shell, but it will not cause errors when you practice. So just for so it can become a habit, I would recommend when you practice and make your own projects, you name them your plans with the words conjuncted, so merged together. Addition to that, I also mentioned that you have some other functionalities like these: run thread groups consecutively, run teardown, functional test mode. You don't need functional test mode. Again, you will most likely be using Postman, tools like that. Teardown group, if you have some teardown groups. I personally rarely use them because JMeter stops execution on its own. And then run thread groups consecutively is a very good practice to have checked when you have multiple thread groups. So if I have two thread groups here, so 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe, it's good to have this so you don't get results from each thread group in parallel. You don't want to do that because, again, the report is not readable. You might get some issues because some tests execute before others when you don't have to have them do that. But again, this should be checked when you have more of those. Oh, let me just do that. I think there you go. Okay. Now, moving from the test plan, where I'm gonna scroll down a bit. The way that let's go here. Okay. Now, once we have our test plan, we can essentially start with creating something for our tests. So the way that you can add items here, we'll also see them a bit in the exercise, is just by right-clicking in add, you'll see what you can add. So the next thing that we actually have for our JMeter option is thread groups. Now, how can you add and what does a thread group have? So if you right-click on the test plan, like I did now, and go to threads, you see it also has users. You can have open model thread group, setup, teardown. The one that you will be using 99.9% of the time in JMeter is thread group. So you can safely click on thread group. And once you have a thread group, we can see we have this information provided here. Now, the thread group in JMeter has a few settings that we can look into here. So we have name. You can name it however you wish. Usually best practice is to just name it thread group. If you have another one, you name that for whatever purpose that is. So maybe that will be a login thread group. So again, depends on how you want to practice naming conventions. And then you have some actions. So you can use continue after a sampler error. Usually you leave this as continue. You don't want to stop the thread. So it just continues and then you see what is the issue. And then you have the thread properties. Now, very important for the thread properties. Number of threads is the number of users. Now, when you're using JMeter, this number of users that we see here, it's not the number of total users as in 10,000 users. This is the number of concurrent users. So this is concurrent users, meaning users that are running at the same time. So this that you have here, if you say 3, it means that 3 will be the number of concurrent users that there will be. So it's very important to know that because we will have, when you're setting this up, we will have a little calculation that we need to do later. So this is the number of users that will be visiting the page at the same time. So all these 5 users, 10 users, 15 users will be there at the same time. Now, the good thing about that is that when you have a given number of users, you have the amount of time for which you want them to get to the page, which is the ramp up period. So this is the number of concurrent users, right? How many users we have at the page at a given moment. And then we have ramp up period. Now this is a bit of a tricky thing, a bit of a confusing thing maybe for some. The ramp up period is the time that you need for all of the users to be on the page at the same time. Because if I say 10 users and I say ramp up period 5 seconds, this means that all the 10 users will be on the page after 5 seconds. If I say 100 and I say 30, just write it down, and I say 30, that means that my 100 users will all be on the page in the same time after 30 seconds. So at 20 seconds, I will maybe have 70 users, or I will have 80 users. I don't really control that, it's random. But this number will only be reached after you have passed this value. So if you say 3, if you have 60, it will be after a minute. If you have 120 after 2 minutes, this all depends on what you want to test. And then we have the loop count. The loop count, I only recommend you use for when you're trying to either do a scenario only once, so you just want to run one test and that's it, or when you're just checking if everything works for your tests. Why do I say that? Loop count is not a very good indicator when you are using when you want to validate load. I see a question from Binu. How do we estimate the value for ramp up period? That's a very good question, actually. So basically, this ties in a bit more into in-depth JMeter, but I will mention this now. Usually, you take the ramp up period based on what kind of test you're going to do. For example, if we're running a spike test, right? So a spike test, we want to test as many users in as a short amount of time as possible, right? So let's say I'm testing 1 minute. So if I say I'm testing for 1 minute and I say 50 seconds ramp up time, then I'm not really testing the maximum for that minute, right? I'm probably just doing it for 10 seconds. So maybe for 10 seconds, I will have 100 users. But if I say I'm doing a spike test and the spike test lasts for 1 minute, if I want to really test the spike, I'm going to say, okay, let's put 100 users in 5 seconds. And then we have 55 seconds with the maximum number of users. So you usually do it based on what kind of test you are going to perform. If you're going to do an endurance test, you're going to have it maybe running for 6 hours. You don't want to immediately hit the page with a lot of users. So you're probably going to say, okay, let's have 2,000 users. And we're going to have them all up and running after 1 hour. Maybe that is the most realistic scenario. Again, this depends from the analytics that we mentioned that you can read. So you can see how much time users need to ramp up. But let's say if I do a 6-hour test, I'm going to say in 1 hour, we're going to have 2,000 users. And then 5 hours, we're going to have those users all in total. Is there any general practice for this? I see from Minu. As I mentioned, the general practice is you want to see what test you're doing first, and then second, use the data from your analytics. So you will see in analytics, again, you're going to see maybe the spikes are usually 50 seconds long. So you're not going to use the times that I just said. You're probably going to use less time. You might see for a prolonged period of time that you have about 1,500 users, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to test with 3,000. You just need to check 1,500 and maybe 16, 1,700 at most. The general practice is you use the analytics to track what values you want. And from my personal experience and the project that I've been to, and what I prefer to do is when I spike test, I want to do the absolute best I can do with a spike test because they are usually very low. And I will show you this as well now. If I have a spike test of 1 minute, I always do only 10 seconds ramp up. So I usually do 10 seconds because I want to see how the system handles the spike. I don't want it to be half of the time. I want it to be nearly all of the time. And again, usually users take 1 to 10 seconds to hit the page. So again, not everybody has the same connection. Not everybody has the same time and latency when they go to the page. So I usually do 1 to 10 seconds, let's say, to warm up and hit the page, and then 50 seconds flat, everybody's on the page. So that's what I would do for a, let's say, spike test most of the time, because it's a, I would say, let's say not a general rule, but behavior. And now the final bit here is what I, again, recommend to do. You just click infinite here on loop count. This is when you want to run your tests. And then you write specify thread lifetime. Now, when you click on specify thread lifetime, this means that you dictate how much time your tests are going to run. So this duration here is how long the tests are going to be executed. Again, it's in seconds. So you can write 1 hour. You can write whatever you need. This depends again on the test. You can also write just 60 seconds if you're doing a simple spike test. But this is really heavily determined on what you want to run. So if we do an endurance, I'm probably going to write something a lot greater. Maybe I'm going to write 14,400. So that would be about 4 hours. Again, this is depending on what kind of test you do. And when you run them, so when you're not checking if your scripts work, you're usually going to select specify thread, and then you're going to say how much do you want the thread to work, what will be the ramp up, so at what time will you have the maximum number of users, and we will again see in the exercise what how we use these numbers into practice. Now we have the samplers. Now I will go step by step again a bit later in the exercise so we can see these items. The samplers, as we mentioned, are the items that we use to simulate action. You can add those by right-clicking. So you see, I right-click the thread group. And when you click on add, you have sampler. And you'll see here, you'll have maybe over 20 samplers. I promise you the most that you will use is HTTP request. So you're not going to really see the others a lot. You might depending on the project, but 90% of the time it's going to be the HTTP request. And these samplers, again, they do some kind of action. So you see I have HTTP request. I can also add one more if you want to see how it looks like. So this is a file transfer protocol request. This is if you want to use some specific file server. It's a bit going too much into details. So this is just to show you how it looks like. And then these samplers you will see are very, very similar to what we had in Postman. So here you have a protocol. This is what you're going to probably say HTTPS most of the time. You have a server name or IP. So this is where you can basically say something along the lines of www.google.com. So just write the domain. You can write the port if you wish to. You specify the request. If you remember, again, this is similar to Postman, get, post, head, put, whatever you need to do. And then the path, you can probably say, let's say Facebook. If you're visiting Facebook on Google, this is not the best example, but essentially you have the server name. So this is the page that you're going to hit, and this is the path if you are going to a specific part of the page. In addition to that, you can add parameters. You see, you can add parameters in the request here. You can add JSON data here, body data. So if you maybe want to log in, you can say post and then copy paste JSON data so you can log in. You can upload files. If we have time, we will see this. This is a very neat feature of the requests. And you can essentially do everything that you can do with the standard API request. So essentially everything you need and you want, you have it here. The general rule is if you are visiting a page, if you want to hit a page, you just select get, you write the page you want to go to, and a subpage if you need to go to a subpage. And it just that is all you will need. If you want to upload something, usually post and then either add a file, maybe add the body if you're logging in. Again, it depends on what you are using. Now, after the samplers, we have the listeners. Now, if you remember, we talked a bit about the listeners as well. Again, I'm right-clicking on the thread group, I go to add, and when I go to add, you will notice we have an option here at the bottom, which is called listener. I mentioned earlier, you have a lot of options, The ones I most commonly use, and I think other teams usually use as well, is the view result tree, aggregate report, sum report. I prefer the view results tree because it is the most easy listener you have, and I'm going to add that one. And you will see when you open the listener, you have all of these items listed here. Now, for the listener, you will have this little, I would say, more, let's say, height-based place here with text. This is where you're going to see whether the test passed or failed. We will see this in the exercise, and this is where you will see all the data that you're working with. Again, these view result trees don't have any specific value aside from helping you to see if your tests are working or not, and to validate if you are sending the correct and receiving the correct data. So they are like a debug, a very good debug tool, let's say. And usually when you have your complete test suite, so you have all your scripts, you're going to usually right click and you're going to go on disable for view results trees. So this is when you are running your scripts on a project in a pipeline or in shell. So if you run them in shell or something, you have to remember to disable the view results trees because they affect performance and can actually cause a lot of errors for the JMeter tests. Again, that's a tad more advanced. For now, you can just use it to practice and see how your tests are running. Now, I think that's basically it for the basic items of JMeter. Do you have any questions maybe about the thread groups, about the samplers, maybe the listener? Again, we'll have a bit of practice for this, so I'm gonna do a bit more explaining there. Okay, let's move on to the advanced JMeter features. Now, these that I just mentioned are the basics. So this is what you will most often have in a script. Again, you might never even use some of the more advanced options. I say might because often you will, but there are scenarios that you don't really need them, but it's good to know them. And although we'll see they have a bit more options maybe than some of the basic ones, they're quite straightforward once you get the hang of it. So one of them are the controllers. If you remember, we mentioned that they are used to basically control the flow. Again, you right click your thread group, you click add, and you have logic controllers. And you see we have this insane amount of controllers as well. The one I use the most often is random, once only, and then sometimes loop. Depends on what I'm needing. I'm just going to open one, so once only controller. And now you might notice there are basically no options here. That is because everything is built inside the controller. So if I add something here, let's say I add 2 samplers, right? This is just the samplers that we added from here. So now everything that I have under this once only controller will only be executed once. So even if I have 10,000 users and they all go to this page, they will not visit this page ever again. They just do it once. They just do the action that they need to do once, and that's it. That's all. They're never going to visit the page. They might never be able to upload anything again. They're just going to do it once, and that's it. So it's very important to note that these controllers have these built-in functionalities, and they're very useful again. So if you want to use and play around with them. I strongly recommend to go through some of the JMeter documentation, because again, even I have a lot of controllers I've never used. For example, interleave controller, or maybe the module controller. Again, a lot of options. You're not expected to know all of them, and you have a very good documentation if need be. Then we have the processors, and we're going to see how you can actually add them as well. So you just need to click the thread group. You're just going to go to preprocessor, postprocessor. Again, whatever you might need. One thing that I would note here is you might need it sometimes if you're using some cookies and login scenarios. You could actually need the JSON extractor, which is a post processor, and that one looks like this. And you essentially just state what you want to extract. Usually how this works is you will have some kind of sampler that is related to this extractor. For example, let's say here I am sending some kind of JSON, and inside this body, let's say I have a token. So for example, I have, if you remember, this is just this token. So this is the token that I have. So what you will need to do is copy this token, and you want to extract it. So you don't want to do this manually, right? And you probably can just use it here. So you can write the name of the variable that you have inside the JSON. I have the name token, and then this just takes that variable from the request after it is executed. So it would probably something like this request is executed, and then it gives us some kind of token, right? This is what it generates. And then the JSON extractor, because this is after execution, takes the token, so it takes whatever we have in the body here, and essentially saves it for us. And then you can use this for other tests. So again, if you want to log in and need a token, you can just use the JSON extractor. You log in once, it takes the token, and then uses that for other scenarios. Again, this is maybe a bit more advanced, but this is how you can use the post processor. You can also use preprocessor, but again, it's very rare that you're going to have to use this too much. This is probably the most common processor option that you're going to come across. Now we have parameterization and also configuration, which is something that is quite useful. You can actually do it on the level of the entire test plan, which I usually do. You right click the test plan, and when you go to add, you will see config element. So you have a lot of options here. You have HTTP header manager, cookie manager, cache manager, so on and so forth. You can use CSV dataset config. And what you can actually do here is you can actually add some kind of CSV file. If you don't know, it's like an Excel file where you keep some, usually you have some smaller amount of data that you want to use, especially for testing. So you can actually just browse and upload the file here if you want to use this data set, and then you can just make use of it in some of your samplers, in some of your file transfer protocols, maybe in your controller. So you can actually use that. You can actually also add a header manager. So this is if you have any header items that you want to send. If you remember from Postman, we had authorization, for example, so you can maybe add something like authorization, and then here we probably need, I don't know, the token from before. So you might need something like this when you're running some tests. You can also add that. You have a lot of config elements. You can add a cookie manager. So if you're using login, you might have to implement a cookie manager so it stashes your session. This one you don't have to really configure, but it's good to have it if you're using, again, something that requires cookies. So you can just add that. And again, these are basically used to add additional support. So if you don't want to use data directly inside your sampler, you can upload it from a CSV file. You will use this config. If you want more detail in your headers, you can add a header manager. If you want to use some kind of session-based test, you can add a cookie. Again, it all depends on the needs of whatever you are testing at the moment. Finally, we can also go into the assertions. I'm not going to go too much into detail for the assertions. Basically, you just need to click any sampler that you have. For example, I have two, and you just go add. You will have assertions, you have response, JSON, size. It depends again on what you need. Usually, when we're doing these tests, we do JSON assertion because the response, you will most likely see it. But you can add a response assertion, and you see here, like, for example, you have what is the name, you have what does it apply to. So maybe this is the only item that we wanted to apply. We want to say text response, response code, and then we see patterns to test. So this is substring. You can say equals, you can say matches. So maybe we want to say exactly status 200. So we want to say status. So for example, code 200 maybe. We want this to be displayed, so you want to say equals, you want to say matches, so it's similar to this. You want to say substring, so maybe it contains something from here. But again, the assertions are a bit not necessary when you use JMeter, so it's very rare that you're going to be adding assertions or anything, because again, you're testing performance, you're not necessarily testing status codes related to the API. Finally, we have the timer. And the timer is actually very useful, and I use it quite often to basically simulate as much as possible the real scenarios, the real world scenarios. The one I usually use is the constant timer. You have a unified random timer, precise throughput timer. You have a lot of these. Again, you're not expected to know each one of these, what do they do and what do they mean. The ones that you mostly will use is constant timer, and you're probably going to sometimes use uniform random timer. So what is the difference between these? This one adds a delay to this item. So you see this, there is a thread delay. So so the user, when they're on this page, they will probably need to wait for however many milliseconds you assign here. You can say 1000. So they're going to wait for this amount of time before they continue with another action or before they perform an action. For a uniform, a random timer, you can say a random delay maximum and a constant delay offset. So you can basically say one user is delayed for 15 seconds, another user is delayed for maybe 20 seconds, another for 70. This is if you want to be even more specific with the delays of some interactions on the page. Again, these are fairly useful when you want to just play around with um, the um, the real world flows that could happen. So maybe you will have a single flow where everybody is just delayed for the same time, or everybody is randomly delayed, which again, I also like to implement quite often. But again, we're going to be focusing on just executing a bit more simpler tests. These are features that are useful, but again, you might not need to use that frequently. All right. Does anyone have any questions related to the items that we discussed here? Any questions regarding maybe the advanced features, the basic features as well? I see some people writing in the chat. Maybe said nope. Okay, wonderful. So before we go to the break, a brief recap. Before we start working with JMeter, we only have the test plan. It gives us everything that we have in order to be able to run our tests. We use thread groups in order to simulate virtual users and stay settings like how much time will they be running for, in what amount of time will the maximum amount of users be up, how much time will they be running afterwards. So essentially gives us the most important part of the entire thread group. We have the samplers, which are similar to, which are basically requests that we saw similar to in Postman, where we need the URL that we use, the path if we have a specific subpage, and the request that we will be using. So if we try to reach a page, we use get, post if we want to upload something, so on and so forth. Then we talked a bit about the listeners, which give us like a real-time report of what is happening if our tests are basically working as expected. And then regarding the more advanced options, we talked about controllers, like the ones only that run some samplers only once. We talked about post-processor, pre-processor options like the JSON extractor that we can use after our tests are executed and then maybe take data from something or store something within. And we also talked about general configuration, which we can basically use if we need to add some specific files for testing with data inside them, or just configure some headers, cookies. And also we discussed some timers, which we can use to simulate basically a real user interaction with a specific delay that we decide on, or a random one that is provided by the timer itself. Okay, that's basically some of the options that we will see in the exercise from JMeter. I think we can have the break right now before the last session, because then we will dive into 1 to 2 exercises that we will see with JMeter. And yeah, hopefully we get a bit of the action in the next session. So yeah, Jumana, you can take over. Okay, now let's dive back into the practical part with JMeter. So currently we are at the hands-on lab part, and we will be diving into some practical exercises with JMeter. Now, if you have not set up your JMeter locally, or if you have, you can choose to use that if you want, but it's best if you use the VM that we have prepared, because we have an application which we can use for the load testing, and we also have everything set up in JMeter, so it will be a bit more smooth sailing than just doing everything locally. So what will we do? We will basically open an application that we have prepared here for us, and we are going to run our test scripts that we will design as well here against that application. Now, I'm going to scroll down a bit and we're going to follow the steps together. So first off, so that we can, before we start, we just want to make sure that everybody can access this VM. So if you have any issues, please let us know. And then if everything is okay, we are going to run the application first, because we need it up and running before we can actually run our scripts. So what do we need to do to start the web application? We need to open a terminal window in the VM, and then we need to navigate to where it is stored. So how you can open a command line, you can just go here into the search at the bottom left, and here we can write in the search CMD. And if you write CMD, you will have the command prompt displayed here inside the search. Select that. And then you should see something like this. Once you've selected, all we need to do is navigate to this directory. So you don't need to stress too much about it. You can just copy it. And then once you go back into the virtual machine, you can just paste it inside here in the terminal. And what we're doing now is we're just changing directory. So this is not something related to performance test. This is just navigating to where we need to run the application. So once you do that and click enter, you will be taken to the correct path. Now, once we are here in the lab sample web app directory, we need to run the application. And because this is done in Python, you will need to write Python, then empty space app.py. You can also just copy paste this, whichever works for you. You can copy this and just paste it. And once you do and write Python app.py, you just click enter. Well, I didn't click on the VM, so that was my issue. And now once you have, let me just click it here. It should take a bit of time and then it should be up and running. Let me just see why I'm not getting the, let me just try again because I have some issues here. So now I'm going to try to write Python app.py. It should run. There we go. Now, if you're able to write Python app.py, an empty space, you should see something like this. And this means that your application is up and running. And now if you want to access it, you can copy this link if you want from the bottom here, HTTP localhost 500. So you can just go a bit down here, copy this. I will also send it in the chat. You will have it in the live chat here. So you can just copy that link and open a browser and run it inside the VM. This is just to make sure that you're able to access the page so that the tests will not fail. And once you copy paste the link inside the browser, you will see this welcome to complex web application, some items here with links. So you should be able to see this layout for the time being if you have run the application successfully. Again, if you have some issues, feel free to leave them in the chat and we can tend to them so we can all follow at the same pace. Okay, now we have our application up and running, so we are able to see the layout in the browser. And for the time being, I'm just going to minimize it. So I'm not going to close this application. I'm just going to minimize it because we might need to see some links. And now we need to open JMeter. Now here you can actually just run it through the console because you see we say we have the instructions, open a new command line and then type the following command, which is great. So I'm just going to write CMD again, enter, and then I'm just going to write JMeter inside. And if you run JMeter like this, it should open it as well. We're just going to wait a bit of time now before it can open. Again, this is similar to what we did with the batch file. So this is just doing it through the shell command. And we're just going to follow all the instructions. So that's why I'm opening it like this. Okay, after a bit of waiting, you should be able to see JMeter the same way that we saw it previously on our end locally or when I was sharing it early on. So there should be nothing. You should only have the test plan. Everything should be set to default. And it basically should be the same layout as before. So we are running the application. We have JMeter. So everything is okay. We can open it. And one thing, thank you also Jumana for mentioning, do not close the command prompt. So if you close the command prompt for either the application or for JMeter, they are going to close. It's not a big issue, but you know, it might stop you from running the tests or just having to open JMeter once again. So just keep that in mind. Thank you, Jumana. And yeah, so once we're ready, so we have everything here, we can start with designing our performance scripts. So I'm going to scroll down. So it's very good that we also have the content here. Now, let's first of all create, as mentioned here, our thread group. So if you remember from the previous session, we right-click the test plan, we hover over add, and we will see the threads here, and we just select the thread group. All right, now we can rename the thread group, and we're going to use the name that we have from the instructions, which is sample thread group. So now we have the name. All it's left to do is to configure it. So we see in the materials that we have to set the number of threads or users to 100. So I'm going to set this to 100. Then ramp up period is set to be 10. So we're going to set up 10 seconds here. And then the loop count should be 1, so we can leave this as it is. So what this means for us is we are going to be running 100 users after 10 seconds for only one instance. So this will only happen once. We do not have a specified duration, so this will not happen for 2 or 3 minutes. We're just going to run it once in this iteration. Again, if you want to try it out with the duration, you just need to click the specify thread lifetime here. Okay, now we are done with our thread group. So we have added the number of users, the ramp up period, and the loop count. The next part that we need to do is add our samplers. So currently we don't have anything. We only have the thread group. So if we want to run some scenarios, we will need to create samplers. So let's create the first one as per the instructions. So we need to, there we go. So we need to right click the thread group. Also, one more side note, when you change the name of an item, it will not change here in the tree. You need to click on another element and then click the same element and then it changes. So that's if you're really very specific about the namings to be equal on both ends, but it doesn't change anything for the tests. Okay, now we right click the thread group, we select add, and now we see the sampler. And for this lecture, we see that we will be needing the HTTP request. So I'm just going to select an HTTP request. And now let's see how we're going to configure this request. So we're going to name it homepage request. So immediately we go into the name here and say homepage request. Okay. Then we're going to add the server name or IP. So that is this place here. And we're going to write down local host. So if you remember, the page is running on localhost 5000. And so do not be confused, 5000 is a port number. So it's not like a part of the URL in terms of a string that we will need, but it is essentially a port. So that's why we're going to write in the port number here 5000. And then we need to see if we need to specify a GET request. It says GET here, so we're going to leave this as it is. And in path, we're going to add a dash because we don't have any sub page that we're targeting. So we see that this is everything that we need for the first item. Now, let's move on and create another one. And now you may ask, why do we need another one? Well, we also have it in the instructions, but we also saw, if I open the page again, you see we have a few pages here, get sample data, get complex data, sleep endpoints. We have a few items here, and we're trying to hit each one of them separately. So that's why we're going to create another request, and we're going to call this one API data request. There we go. Again, everything that we wrote down in the first one, localhost, then we're going to write port number, which is 5000. We have a get method. And now we need some kind of path, because right now what we will be doing is just running the same request, but with a different name. So what we can do is we can see what do we have here. So we have API data request. So let's see if we have any difference here. So maybe, yeah, so it is the first one. So if you notice, if I click on get sample data, it takes me to this page and we see that this is a sub page. So it's not the local host page, it is actually a sub page from it. So what we can actually do is we're just going to copy this. I'm going to close this because I just need the URL. And then in the path, we write dash, and then we paste the endpoint. So it's API-data. So this is what we will need to add for this second sampler. Okay, do we need to add something else? Based on what we see here, we don't, so we can move on and create another one. Again, following the same flow, right-click the thread group, we select add sampler and then HTTP request. And we're going to name this one, let's name the third one complex data request. So complex data request will be the name. And now again, we will be doing the same setup. And now at this moment in time, you might think to yourself, well, we have the same server name and the same port number. Can we help ourselves and not do this every time we create an HTTP request? The answer to that is yes, and we will see how you can do that. But first, we want to touch a bit how the samplers work. So we're going to do this let's say, a bit step by step. And then in the next bit, I'm going to show you how we can modify these items. So for now, I'm just going to add the port, add the local host. It's another get method. And now we want to check what is the other endpoint. So this is complex data. So I'm going to open the second one because it says get complex data. And we're going to copy what we see here in the endpoint. So I'm just going to add that in the path again. Again, same procedure, add a dash, paste the endpoint inside, and this should be it for this sampler. Now we're going to go for the next one, which is the sleep endpoint request. Same procedure as before. Now we're going to add the HTTP request. We're going to name this one. We're going to name it sleep endpoint request. And then we're going to add the local host again. And we're going to add 5,000 here. And the path for this one, we need to check whether it is the correct one. Again, always remember to double check endpoints. Sometimes you might have requirements that have outdated information, or maybe some developers made some changes that have not been yet let's say, spread to the team due to some other things that they were dependent on. So it's always a good practice to double check everything that you read. If you have in the requirements this data point, make sure to check and see if it is the correct one that you need to hit. So we're adding the API sleep, and then we have the fifth and the final one. So I'm just going to click here, add sampler, HTTP request. And again, it is everything as before. I forgot to name this one, so I'm just going to do it after implementing all the necessary data. And then we have the last endpoint that we want to reach. I'm just going to close this for now. So this is the calculate endpoint, which is the final one. And if I open it, it is API calculate, which is the same as we have in the instructions. So I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to open JMeter again. There we go. So dash API calculate, and we're going to name this to be calculate endpoint request. There we go. So you notice that everything is named together, so nothing is separated. Again, that's especially important for your test plan, but it's a good practice to name all of the items and the test plan together so you don't have any issues during execution due to PowerShell or your pipeline. So it's a general good practice. Okay, now we have added everything from the samplers. So we have all of the data that we need. We can see that everything is configured. All that is left for us before we can run our tests is to add our listeners. And if you remember, what we said was that we can right click on the thread group. So I missed the thread group. Add, and then if you scroll to the end, you have listeners. So you have view result tree, we have summary report, aggregate report. For this exercise, we're going to open the view result tree, and I'm going to also add the aggregate report so that you can see what is the difference as well. There we go. View result tree and aggregate report. So this is what they would look like. The aggregate report is a bit different. So you see you have all of these different parameters that are here that tell us different information, but we're going to get to that once we run the tests. All right. And finally, we want to save the test plan so that have everything configured and ready for when we need to run out these tests. And what you can do is you just select the test plan, click on File. You have the option to save test plan as. So here it is. And now what we will be doing is we need to locate the test plan folder. So let's find the desktop. So this is in C. So this is desktop. And we have the test plans here. So this folder, you can find it under desktop. So if you're not sure, you can click the drop down here at the top when you're saving, and you will notice under this PC, you have desktop. So you can just select desktop, and then you will see test plans here. So what I'm going to name this test plan, I'm going to name it same as the instructions. So it's going to be sample test plan dot, let me just see if I have a dot, yeah, dot JMX. And JMX is a JMeter executable. So this is the format for which you will save your JMeter files. And this is very important when you run them in shell or in CMD. They have to be this file type, and they are executed with JMeter. So you can't execute these files with anything else. You can only use the JMeter command. We're going to click save if we're satisfied with our result, and our test plan is right now saved. Now we have saved and configured everything we have for the test plan, and now what we can do next is run the test we have created. So all you need to do is inside JMeter, you're going to see start, and you're going to see this start no pauses. You just need to click start, and the test will start to execute. Before I continue with the execution, do you have any questions? Maybe did I go a bit too fast? Do you want me to repeat any step from the process? So maybe we can also create something in addition to what we have. Let's see. If everything is okay, again, feel free to mention if you want me to repeat a step, it's no problem. So we can do it again. We can do it as many times as necessary. It's important that you get the hang of it and understand what are some of the basics, at least, of performance testing. So feel free to interrupt me again at any time, and we can redo or do a step from scratch. Okay, thank you, Jumana, as well, for the message. So if there are no issues so far, I'm now going to run the tests that I just did. And I'm going to use this green run button. So I'm just going to click start. And as you notice, I'm inside the view result tree. You can be in the aggregate report. You can basically hover or be anywhere where you like, basically. So it's not something specific here. So I'm just going to click run. We're going to wait for a bit. All right, let me just see. Okay, so I'm just gonna stop the execution. There we go. All right, so let's see what is the issue that I'm running into. So let's see what's happening here. We can see that we have a few issues. We see that it says the socket is closed. So this is very good. We can actually see how a bit of debugging goes on when we have these items. So you can see actually that the socket was closed. So this can mean vast number of items. So I'm just trying to request something, and in the response, I see no socket. Let's see what is the issue. So if I go back to the first item, I have the local host here. This is not the page, so this is the page. I have port number 5000. Let's just make sure that everything is okay and configured properly. So we have the correct, this 5000. Okay, it is local host. what is the first thing that I do in this scenario? So we can see that I have some issues. I can see if it's maybe localhost. We see that the path is okay. We see that everything is correct here. We can also double check in the content if I might have made any mistakes for the request, but I see that everything seems to be in order. So we can actually scroll and see that the issues with the socket. Okay, so that can mean one thing. It could mean actually that basically I've missed some information regarding the port number or the URL in general. But from what I see, everything is okay. So then we can actually do this. We can decrease the number of users. So we can say 15, or we can actually just do 5, let's say, for starters, and try to run everything once again. So let's see what happens now. You can also see in the top right when the users are essentially done. So we can see what happens now. Okay. All right, I still see. So I think if I just stop the execution here, let me just stop. I'll probably get the same error again. I'm just gonna open everything here. Yes, I still get the same issue. So let's see what could be the issue that's causing this. If not, we can just switch to a different page. So let's see, this is the local page, local host. So I am on the right place and we are using it. So I'm gonna write again.
So Angelo, excuse me.
Yeah.
Is your server running?
Yep. It's
Can you just like did you just like F5, press F5 just
yep.
for me to see? Okay, so it's running. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, let's just wait a little bit. It's not stopping. It's only loading, loading, and it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Because
I think
I did this lab yesterday and it's working, and today I did it again and it's working on my side.
yep. This is the first. I mean, I also did it a few times a few days ago, but I think we can actually just restart everything here, basically. So I'm
Yes,
just
because
going to
it's loading, so just close it and just run again like the Python script. So
yep.
and run.
Yep. Thank you for chiming in, Seraphim. I'm just going to open let me just see which console it was. So it is this one. So for now, I'm just going to close everything. And you can actually see also the get methods here. I forgot to mention. So I'm going to close this all together and I'm going to open another CMD. Now let's try to see if we can, if I need to copy the path where we were. So I'm just going to briefly go through the materials.
Actually, okay, you have the path there. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. And I'm going to run Python app.py. Let's see what's happening now. Okay, we should be good to go. So I'm just going to open my browser once again. Just minimize this. So it should remember the, yeah. Okay, now we should have the test up and running. So I'm just gonna go here and I'm going to, let me just see if I save the changes, localhost. Yeah, okay, everything is okay. So let's just see now if we are able to run, at least with 5. And we see that the scenarios are now coming in. Wonderful. Thank you, Seraphim, once again. So as you can see, these things can happen. The application was having a little issue. It probably just needed a restart or a refresh, like we did so. But now we can see the results are coming in. And now, when you have these past tests, for example, let's go into the sample result. So the first thing that you're going to see is you're going to see all this information provided. So you're going to see the connect time, you're going to see the load time. These are all parameters that you want to note for when you're going through them. You have the size in bytes for everything, you have the headers. So all the information provided here can be also exported into a report. And the best part is to make sure that the response code is 200, or rather the page can be accessed. So we see that everything is in order here. And then if you want to double validate, you can go to the response data field. And here you see the application that we see, complex web application. We see what is displayed. So you see welcome to the complex web application, header 1. So if I open it here, we will notice that everything that we have in the response is what we see in our page when we open the browser. So everything should be listed here. Same goes for the other pages. So if I go to the API data request, this is a different page. So you see, this is a simple endpoint for performance testing. So this is something that you will see on that page. We can also, if we want to double check, open that page as well. So I can just click on the get sample and you see, I see this information provided here. Now, the most you can do validation is when you go to the page, you see what you get in the response, and then just copy and compare the items that you have in this response data. Otherwise, the sample result will be most likely the same that you're going to see here. Same can be applied for the other bits. So we can open the calculate endpoint. We can see in the response data that we have some kind of calculation that's performed here. We can also see here some items for the load time. So connect time, load time are a bit smaller. The page has a bit less content, so this is normal. And if you want to dive into more detail for your report, you can open the aggregate report. And you can see how many samples we have for each page. We can see what is the average time that was spent on each. We can have, as you can see here, I'm just going to open, you need to stretch out these columns a bit. You have the median, we have all this information. Again, these items you will probably most often use just to make sure that your scripts are working. Again, as I mentioned, you want to disable them when you're running the scripts in PowerShell or in a pipeline, because these do affect performance. So I would recommend just sticking with the view result tree and making sure that everything is executing as expected. And if you open some of the other requests, we can also see some of these that did not work. If you go into the response data, you see we have the socket issue that was displayed here. You can go into detail and then explore the page if you want to find more information, because the listeners sometimes don't give the most detail in their response data. However, you will be able to see what is happening, and we can see here that the response that we were getting is socket closed for this case. So do you have any questions regarding this? Do you maybe have this issue? Do you maybe have anything that you want me to repeat? Do you maybe want to run one more scenario with the standard get procedure? Okay. I don't see any questions so far. I see somebody's writing in the chat. Let's see if there's something. Again, feel free to let me know to repeat some steps. If it's a bit hard to follow, I can redo all of the steps if you want. We can also go through each of these and explain again what were we doing. I see Binu wrote, could you please repeat from beginning steps? Of course, yeah, no worries. So basically what we did, I'll use the same structure so you can follow along with this. Basically, the first thing that we did when we entered the test plan is we right-clicked here on the test plan. We selected that, threads, and then we selected thread group. So this is what we did first. And once we did that, we got this thread group. So I'm just gonna delete the second one because we don't need it right now. And then after we had our thread group, we set up the settings basically for the thread group itself. So I used 5 instead of 100. We can also set up with 100. It's no issue. This was something that was related to the application that I tried to run. You can set it up to 100 users with a ramp up period of 10 seconds, and then for a single loop count, meaning this will be executed only once. Ah, okay. Sorry, Binu, you mentioned as the VM steps as well. No worries. Okay. For the VM, what you need to do is first you click on the search here at the bottom. You will open like this Windows Explorer bit, and then you write cmd command prompt. You open the command prompt like so. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to start the application. So the way that you can start the application is in the steps. So on the right side here, you can see start the sample web application. You can copy this. So copy the changing of the directory, this command. I can send it in the chat again, so you can have it. And you paste this command inside here. So inside this command prompt. So like this. You click enter. And once you're here, so you're inside the correct directory where you need to be, all you need to do is write Python like this, and then empty space, app.py. That's all you need to do. And then you click enter. So once you click enter, once you've written this, what you will be able to see is, so I'm just going to scroll a bit up here. You should be able to see the part above Control C to quit. So you should see this warning. You should see running on all addresses. You should see running on HTTP. So you should be able to see this bit here up until press Control C. So you should be able to see that. And if you can see that, so if this is all up and running, what you can do next is you can just minimize the command line. You can open a browser, so you can open any browser that you want. I use Chrome. And what you need to write in is this URL that I'm going to paste for you. Oops. So you can just use this URL. You have it in the materials. And then you just copy paste this URL inside. So localhost 500 is the URL. And this is to double check that we have the application up and running. So if you're able to see what I showed you in the command line, so if you're able to see this bit of text right here, this one, if you're able to see it, and you're able to open the application in the browser like so, then that means everything is running. And now, because you have already went and done that, what you need to do is you need to run JMeter. And the way that you can start it here is you open a new command line. So you do cmd again. We open the command line and we write JMeter inside the new command line. That's all you need to do after you have the application running. So you write JMeter, you click enter, and then it should start JMeter. Now I'm probably going to have 2 JMeters, but it's okay. Are we okay up till the JMeter point? Are you able to, in the terminal, so in the command cmd, are you able to see this this warning, this serving flask up? Is this shown? So this part, like warning running on all addresses, are you able to see that? Okay. One thing you can try, it's maybe the same issue that I had. So one thing you can do inside this terminal is you can hit Control C, so like copy inside the terminal. It should finish everything that you have here. Then close the terminal and try to run the application again. So you can just do Control C inside the terminal. And once you do that, everything should stop here inside the application. And you will see again the directory you're in. So this is what you will see. You can close the terminal window, and then you can open a terminal once again. So I think I can use this one maybe. Yeah. So you need to open a new terminal again. So just CMD in the search as we did, and just redo the steps again. So wait, I'm gonna do them again. So again, you just close the terminal, you run it again. And right now, since you are in the new terminal, you need to copy again the changing of directory. So you need to copy this command again. And again, when you're in the directory, you run python app.py. Now this should open the application, hopefully without any issue this time. Again, this might be because there are a lot of users trying to access it, but it should be open now if you restart it. I think that would be that should make it work. And if not, we can see because we have a bit. Yes, the browser is open. Wonderful. Great. Great. Yeah. Then now the steps that we left off, what you can do is you have this command line open. Now you need to open another one. So this is a separate one. You again write in the search CMD. And then inside, when it's opened, you just write JMeter. That's it. Just JMeter, and you click enter. And once you click enter, it should start JMeter. So you should be able to see it. You should be able to see the empty JMeter. So this one is the one that I used. I think this one is the one that I have empty. So you should be able to see this when you write JMeter. Yep, no worries. Now what I did for the JMeter part, I'm gonna run it down again as briefly as possible because I want to show you all some additional things. All you need to do is right click on the test plan, add, then threads, and then thread group, which will create a thread group for you. I'm gonna delete this new one. And for the thread group, you're gonna set up everything like here. So you can name it however you want. You can also leave it if you want as it is. You're gonna add the number of threads, which is 100. You can add another number if you want. You can add 50. Then you're gonna add the seconds, the ramp up period, how much time do you want before everybody is up, and then set it to one loop. So that is the setting for the thread group. And finally, when you want to add the samplers, you right click the thread group, you select add sampler, and then HTTP request here. And once you click that, you will add a request like this. And you need to do that 5 times. So we added 5 requests. You can see here we have 5. And all you need to do is just add the URL. So for example, for all of them, you can copy paste the server name, which is localhost, and the port, which is 5000. For the first one, for the home page, you just use this dash. For the second one, you will need API data. You just need the URLs, which are here in the instructions. And you can just copy those, and everything is the same. So all samplers are the same. The only difference is the path. So the third one is API data complex. The fifth is API calculate. So you only need to change this and everything remains the same. Hopefully this helped out. Also those who might have not been able to follow as well. Now, another additional thing that I wanted to show, because I don't think we'll have time for some extra exercises, is there is a very neat feature that you can actually use. Let me just see here. So basically, When you click right click on the thread group and you have add, you will see this config element, which we talked a bit about before. And you can actually use this request defaults item. Now let me tell you what this request defaults is. Now you'll see me also, I'm going to move this to the top because I want it to be here as a default. Now, what is the HTTP request defaults? So this is a configuration. It's fairly new. So this is not a feature that was implemented early on. Before, we usually use the variables for this, but I will show you for what. And you will notice that this default request has a similar layout to the samplers. So you see, they have a very similar layout. They have basically the same things that the default one has. And I'm going to name this the default request data. You can name it however you want. This is just for what is used. I want to specify. Now, what can you do here? As you noticed, each sampler that we were creating, so this one, the third one, the fourth one, so on and so forth, each of them had the same server name or IP and the same port number, right? So what we had to do every time was I had to right click and then write localhost and then write 5000. Then again, I need to write localhost, I need to write 5000. Localhost 5000. And this is very repetitive. And on real projects, you're probably going to have maybe 15 pages at a time, or you're going to have 20 places that you need to test, maybe some APIs, endpoints, pages mixed. So when you have a lot of data like that, and you have some repetitive things like this, you don't really want to go ahead and for each request, write down the URL, write down the port, and then do it again or duplicate it, whatever. You don't want to do that each time. You want to make it as simple as possible and as readable as possible. So what does this config tool do? Basically, it is the same as a sampler, except it doesn't execute. So this is just a config. So this one applies to all of the samplers that we will use in our thread group, which is amazing because look what I can do. I can write localhost here, right? So localhost, I can just, if we want to make sure everything is correct, we can just copy it. So I'm just going to write localhost here. And then I'm going to write port number, which is 5000. And then for path, I'm going to leave it blank because each item has a different path, right? And then what you can do is actually, you can go into each of your requests and you can erase basically the port and the URL or the server name. You can do it for this one. We can do it for this one. So I'm just going to do this for everyone. Again, now you might say, well, he's now erasing everything and is still wasting time like even prior to creating this item. But usually you will have this item and then you will create the sampler. So the config comes first when you have the plan. Now, what I've done, I've set up this config file and said, okay, for each request that we have in the thread group, so each sampler, give them this server name and give them this port number. The path is going to be determined by them themselves. So you see the home page has no path. It's just the home page. You have the API data path here. So it will inherit the server name and the port number. Same here. And this will add its own path. So it will say localhost 5000 API data complex. And it's a very neat tool because now we'll be able to just write everything we need in one place and then run it for all our samplers. And now we have set up everything here. We can go into our result tree. I'm going to scroll down to the end and we can run some tests. So you see, I'm going to continuously get all the tests here. They're still ramping up. You can see the numbers changing here. We can see everything that has been executed. And now we see we have a very big amount of results. Everything is passed. You can see all the endpoints are working as expected. We're getting the same results, so we can see everything is okay. And if we want to double check whether changing the URL actually worked, we can actually say, okay, is this the correct place? Let's see, sleep for a while, status success. That's what the sleep endpoint says. So let's just double check if that's what we can see. I'm going to open the browser. And now we see the same thing that is displayed here is what we actually get. Oops, this is the wrong JMeter. So is what we actually get inside our response that we get in JMeter. Let's see the most important probably one, which is the home page. So I'm just going to scroll and try to find the home page. There we go. Let's see if we have everything displayed here, just to be on the safe side. If I go back, so I have the welcome complex, there's some more, and then we have the links. And I missed the JMeter again. So we can see here again, we have the header, we have the title, we had all of the elements and links listed below, meaning that we actually do have a working test. Again, if you want to make your testing a bit easier, I highly recommend using this HTTP request defaults for your requests. It's very easy, very handy, especially when you have this repetitive type of server name and port, because it could happen. You could have pages, at least 6, 7, 8 pages with the same URL. They can also have the same path sometimes, so you can also specify the path. If you have 3 tests that end at API data, you can also apply that for them. What's really important is to make sure that then you just go to those requests and remove what you added. If it's the path, you remove the path. If it's only the server name, the server name. So it depends on what you did. And you can play around with this configuration a lot more. One thing I would also add, if you're very curious, I will also send the link from this page. There is a very interesting page which is used for testing. I'm going to send it in the chat. It's the Heroku U app. This is a place where you can practice uploading files. And what I mean by that, you can actually try to see, if you're curious, how you can upload a file using the file upload inside samplers. It's maybe challenging for beginners, and I highly recommend, if you're interested, to give it a go. We don't have a time to do it now in the exercises, but it's not something overly complicated, and I think you will find it very fun and challenging to do. So I highly recommend trying to do that. Okay, to wrap up, basically what we talked about today is the basics of JMeter. We saw what the interface looks like, what are some of the basic components, which are the test plan. We said that is something that collects all of the items that we have needed for our test scripts. We have the thread group, another major component, which is basically a group of the users that we will simulate and we will hit the page with, where we can set up how many users we want to be used in the same time, as well as the ramp up period or the time needed for all of them to visit the page. We also talked a bit about the samplers and the listeners, which are some of the other basic components. Samplers being the actions of the user, so which pages they visit and how do they interact, or rather what kind of method do they use. And the listeners being something that gives us information on whether our tests are executing properly and whether we get the correct data. We also saw some advanced features like configuration items similar to the request defaults, the timers, and the logic operators that we saw before, controllers rather, which again could use if you want in your practice to get a better hang of them. But for the time being, this is a good introduction and enough elements that you can play around with before you move to those more advanced scenarios. One thing I really want to add is, let me just go to the downloads here on my end. So this is just one formula I really wanted to do before I wrap it up. Because you're going to be using concurrent users in JMeter, there is this formula that you can actually use. You don't have to use it. Most of the time, clients might give you the amount of concurrent users, but I'm just going to add it for you all. You can actually just calculate how many users you will need to use in JMeter. If you take the users per hour, this is usually something that the client will give you as a number, and multiply it by the average test duration. So this is usually the time the user spends on a page, and then just divide it by the time you're testing. So if you want to test 10,000, how many concurrent users you need if you test 10,000 users per hour, you will need to take 10,000, multiply it by, let's say they use the page for 2 minutes, by 2, and then divide it with 3,600, which is 1 hour in seconds. So this is something that you can make use of. I wanted to mention it early on, but you're rarely going to use it. This is just something that I practice when clients might forget to give us information. So I just use it based on some other facts that they've provided. I will send this in and you can also play around with this if you wish to, but it's nothing mandatory. Okay. If there are any questions, you can go ahead. And if not, Jumana, you can take over. That'll be all from